The massive alien ship cast a shadow over the United Nations building in New York. Its polished purple surface reflected the morning sun, creating an intimidating display of power that had everyone on Earth holding their breath. This wasn't humanity's first contact with alien life. That had happened 3 months ago, when the Valkyrie Empire's scout ships had appeared in orbit. But this was different. This was the day the Empire would decide humanity's fate. Inside the UN Assembly Hall, 200 representatives from Earth's nations sat in tense silence. At the center stage stood 3 Valkyrie warriors, each nearly 8 feet tall with silvery skin that seemed to shimmer under the lights. Their combat armor, decorated with marks of countless victories, made them look like giants from ancient myths. The lead Valkyrie, wearing a golden crown of thorns that marked her as High Commander, stepped forward. Her voice boomed through the hall without need for amplification. "People of Earth, we have observed your civilization for the past 3 months. You are—" She paused, her lip curling slightly. "Interesting." The room remained silent. Everyone knew what interesting meant to the Valkyries. In the past weeks, they had made it clear that they considered Earth a backwater planet populated by undersized beings who barely understood space travel. The Valkyrie Empire rules over 3,000 star systems. The High Commander continued. "For 10,000 years, we have maintained peace through strength. Those who wish to join our trade networks and benefit from our protection must prove their worth." A hologram appeared above the stage, showing various alien species engaged in brutal combat. "This is our way. Combat proves value. Combat reveals truth. Combat separates the worthy from the weak." The Earth Security Council leader, Admiral Thompson, stood up. She was a short woman in her 50s, but her presence matched the Valkyries as she spoke. "And what exactly are you proposing?" The High Commander smiled, revealing teeth that looked metallic. "Simple. We challenge Earth to prove itself in ritual combat. Your best female warriors against ours. Victory means full membership in the Empire's trade network, access to our technology, and our protection." "And if we lose?" Admiral Thompson asked, though everyone knew the answer. "Then Earth remains isolated. No trade, no protection, no access to the stars." The High Commander's smile widened. "We are being generous. Usually, we demand combat immediately upon first contact. But your world's entertainment broadcasts showed us something amusing. We want to see if your martial arts are anything more than dance moves." Murmurs filled the hall. Earth's representatives looked at each other with concern. The Valkyries were known throughout the galaxy as undefeated warriors. Their enhanced strength and advanced combat training made them nearly unstoppable. "We accept your challenge," Admiral Thompson said firmly, surprising even her own staff. The High Commander raised an eyebrow. "You decide quickly. Are you so eager to see your warriors defeated?" "No," Admiral Thompson replied. "I just know humanity better than you do. We've spent our entire history learning to defeat bigger, stronger opponents. From ancient times when we hunted mammoth with spears, to modern martial arts that let smaller fighters defeat larger ones. It's what we do." The Valkyrie warriors laughed, the sound like thunder in the hall. "Brave words," the High Commander said. "You have 1 Earth month to select and prepare your champion. The combat will be broadcast across the galaxy. Choose wisely. This will be your only chance." As the Valkyries turned to leave, the High Commander added one final detail. "Oh, and to make it more interesting, we will send our youngest combat master. Perhaps that will give you a small chance of lasting more than a few seconds." After the aliens left, the hall erupted in heated discussion. Many thought accepting the challenge was suicide. Others saw it as their only chance to join the galactic community. Admiral Thompson stood quietly, already running through potential candidates in her mind. She knew somewhere on Earth was a warrior who could show these aliens that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in its muscles. It was in its ability to adapt, to think differently, and to overcome impossible odds. She just had to find that warrior before it was too late. The military testing center buzzed with activity as candidate after candidate failed to meet the requirements. For 3 weeks, they had tested Olympic athletes, special forces operators, and professional fighters. None had shown the perfect combination of skills needed to face the Valkyries, until Jane Miller walked in. She wasn't what anyone expected. At 5 feet 6 inches tall, the 35-year-old former MMA champion looked ordinary in her simple black training clothes. But the moment she stepped onto the training mat, everyone in the room felt something different about her. "Show us what you can do," Admiral Thompson said, standing at the edge of the mat with her team of experts. Jane nodded and faced the military's top female fighter. What happened next left the room silent. In less than 10 seconds, she had redirected her opponent's strength, swept her legs, and secured a perfect arm lock. She helped her opponent up with a friendly smile. "Again," Admiral Thompson ordered. "Different opponent." For the next hour, Jane faced every style of fighter they had. She defeated them all using different techniques each time. She never relied on strength alone, instead using her opponent's power against them. Later, in Admiral Thompson's office, Jane sat quietly as they reviewed her record. 15 years of competitive fighting, Thompson read from the file. Undefeated in your last 50 matches. Then you quit at your peak 3 years ago to teach combat training. Why? Jane's eyes showed a calm wisdom as she answered. Because winning wasn't teaching me anything anymore. I wanted to understand fighting, not just win at it. Thompson nodded slowly. You know what we're asking. The Valkyries are twice your size. Their bones are reinforced with metal. Their reflexes are enhanced. They're literally built for combat. Everyone's built for something, Jane replied. But that's often their biggest weakness. When you think you're unbeatable, you stop learning. 2 days later, Jane stood in a massive hangar, facing her first Valkyrie up close. The alien warrior, who introduced herself as Star Runner, towered over her. Like all Valkyries, she had silvery skin that rippled with hidden strength and armor that showed off her battle accomplishments. Star Runner walked around Jane, studying her with glowing purple eyes. This is your champion, she asked Admiral Thompson. She looks like a child. I thought size didn't matter to great warriors, Jane said calmly, not moving as the Valkyrie circled her. Star Runner stopped. You mock our ways. No, I respect them enough to question them. The answer seemed to surprise the Valkyrie. Before she could respond, the High Commander entered with her guards. The alien leader's presence filled the hangar, her golden crown gleaming under the lights. So this is Earth's chosen one, the High Commander said. Our young combat master will be disappointed. She was hoping for a challenge, not a warm-up exercise. Jane met the alien's gaze steadily. In my experience, those who talk about how easy a fight will be often haven't fought enough real battles. The High Commander's eyes flashed. Bold words from a tiny being. Do you know our combat master has never lost a match? She has defeated champions from 30 different worlds. Then she's overdue for a good lesson, Jane replied with a slight smile. The tension in the room could have been cut with a knife. The Valkyrie guards reached for their weapons, but the High Commander raised her hand, laughing instead. I like your spirit, little human. It will make it more satisfying when we crush it. She turned to leave, then added, the combat begins in 3 days. I hope you have your affairs in order. After the Valkyries left, Admiral Thompson approached Jane. Was it wise to provoke them? Jane was already doing her stretches, preparing for training. They're used to warriors who either fear them or try to match their aggression. Both approaches play into their strengths. We need to show them something different. And what's that? Jane stood up, a determined look in her eyes. That true strength isn't about size or enhancement. It's about understanding yourself and your opponent. They've never faced someone who thinks this way. She smiled. It's time they learned how humans really fight. Jane sat cross-legged in the observation room, her eyes fixed on the giant screen before her. For the past 12 hours, she had been watching recordings of Valkyrie combat matches. Each video showed the same pattern: overwhelming force, direct attacks, and absolute confidence in their superior strength. "You've been at this all night," Admiral Thompson said, entering with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Jane. "Found anything useful?" Jane nodded, pointing at the screen. "Look at their feet. Every time they attack, they plant themselves firmly. They're used to overpowering opponents, so they root themselves to generate maximum force." She took a sip of coffee. "That's their first weakness." "Explain." "They're always ready to push forward, but they rarely expect to be pulled. In 300 matches, I haven't seen a single Valkyrie use their opponent's force against them." Jane stood up, stretching her tired muscles. "They're so used to being the strongest that they've forgotten how to handle someone who refuses to match strength with strength." A commotion outside interrupted their discussion. Through the window, they saw a group of Valkyrie observers entering the training facility. The aliens had been sending different warriors each day to watch Jane train, probably hoping to intimidate her or gather information. "Let's give them something to think about," Jane said with a slight smile. In the training room, Jane began her daily routine. But today was different. Instead of her usual workout, she demonstrated the core principles of human martial arts. She started with basic judo throws, showing how a smaller person could topple a larger opponent. The Valkyries watched with mixed expressions of confusion and amusement as Jane worked with her training partners. When she easily threw a 250-pound male fighter using minimal effort, some of the aliens leaned forward with interest. "This makes no sense," one of the younger Valkyries said loudly. "How can the small one defeat a larger warrior without using strength?" Jane paused her demonstration. "Would you like to try?" The young Valkyrie looked at her companions, then stepped forward with a confident smile. "I will be gentle, so I don't break you before the real combat." "Perfect," Jane said. "Try to grab me." The Valkyrie moved forward, her 8-foot frame dwarfing Jane. As the alien reached out, Jane simply wasn't there anymore. She had shifted slightly, causing the Valkyrie to overextend. With a simple turn of her body and a light push at the right point, Jane sent the massive warrior tumbling to the mat. The room fell silent. The Valkyrie got up, her silver face showing confusion rather than anger. "How? What did you do?" "I used your own movement," Jane explained. "The bigger and stronger you are, the harder you fall when your force is turned against you." For the next hour, Jane demonstrated more techniques. To everyone's surprise, some of the younger Valkyries asked questions and even requested to try some basic moves. Their natural warrior instincts recognized there was something valuable to learn, even if it went against their traditional training. Later that day, news of the training session reached the High Commander. She watched the video footage with her combat master, a young but legendary Valkyrie warrior named Battle Dawn. "This human uses strange methods," Battle Dawn observed. "She turns away from force instead of meeting it." The High Commander frowned. "It is a coward's way of fighting. No true warrior avoids direct combat." "Yet she defeats larger opponents with ease," Battle Dawn said thoughtfully. "Perhaps. Are you worried about facing this tiny human?" The High Commander asked sharply. Battle Dawn straightened her spine. "Of course not. But a wise warrior studies all combat forms, even weak ones. To understand them is to defeat them." As they continued watching, Jane was showing the simple wrist lock to an interested Valkyrie observer. The human's movements were smooth, efficient, and completely different from anything they had seen in their thousands of years of combat experience. Back in the training room, Jane felt satisfied with the day's work. She hadn't just been training. She had been planting seeds of doubt in the Valkyries' minds. Their certainty in their combat superiority was their greatest weakness, and she had just shown them there was more to fighting than raw power. 2 days left, Admiral Thompson said, as they finished for the day. Jane nodded. 2 days until they learn that the galaxy's greatest warriors still have something to learn from Earth. The Valkyrie observers left the facility that day walking differently, not with their usual confident stride, but with thoughtful expressions and quiet discussions among themselves. Something was changing in their understanding of combat, whether they wanted it to or not. The arena on the Valkyrie mothership was larger than any stadium on Earth. Floating cameras buzzed through the air, broadcasting the event to thousands of worlds. The circular combat zone glowed with a soft blue light, surrounded by rising seats filled with aliens from across the galaxy. Jane stood in the preparation area, watching the preliminary matches on a large screen. The Valkyries had arranged a tournament-style event, with their warriors facing champions from other worlds before the main event. The first match made her stomach turn. A warrior from a high-gravity world, nearly as big as a Valkyrie, lasted only 30 seconds before being thrown out of the ring. The second match was even shorter. "They're showing off," Admiral Thompson said, standing beside Jane. "Trying to scare you." Jane nodded, but kept watching closely. "Look at their champion," battled on. "She hasn't taken her eyes off me since I entered the room." In the waiting area across the arena, the young Valkyrie combat master Indiv stood watching, her silver armor decorated with red markings of her many victories. Unlike the other Valkyries who were cheering and celebrating, Battle Dawn remained quiet, studying every move Jane made. The High Commander's voice boomed through the arena. "And now for the match you've all been waiting for. Earth's so-called champion will face Guard Captain Stormrise in the first qualifying round." The crowd roared as a massive Valkyrie warrior stepped into the ring. Stormrise stood 9 feet tall, even larger than most of her kind, with battle scars visible on her silvery skin. "Don't let her size intimidate you," Thompson whispered. Jane smiled. "I'm not intimidated. I'm measuring." As Jane walked toward the ring, the alien crowd fell into confused murmurs. Many had never seen a human before, and her small size compared to Stormrise caused some to laugh. "This is what Earth sends to face us." Stormrise's voice carried across the arena. "I've fought children larger than you." Jane entered the ring calmly, assuming a relaxed stance. "Then this should be interesting." The match signal sounded. Stormrise charged forward immediately, her favorite opening move based on the footage Jane had studied. The Valkyrie's hands reached out to grab and throw, a move that had won her countless fights. But Jane wasn't there. She had shifted just enough to let the Valkyrie's momentum carry her forward. As Stormrise passed, Jane trapped her arm and used the alien's own force to direct her movement. The massive warrior found herself flying through the air, completely out of control. The arena fell silent as Stormrise crashed to the mat. The Valkyrie jumped up, anger replacing her earlier amusement. She attacked again, this time more cautiously. Jane weaved around the strikes, never meeting force with force, always turning and redirecting. When Stormrise committed to a powerful punch, Jane finally saw her opening. The human moved inside the Valkyrie's guard, using a simple hip throw that any first-year judo student would recognize. But the execution was perfect. Stormrise, with all her strength and size, found herself helpless as she was lifted and thrown. This time, when she hit the mat, Jane followed her down. Before the Valkyrie could recover, she found her arm locked in a submission hold. "Yield," Jane said quietly, applying just enough pressure to make her point. Stormrise struggled for a moment, then did something no one expected. She laughed. "I yield. By the stars, I yield." The arena exploded in chaos. Some aliens cheered, others protested, and the Valkyries themselves seemed split between outrage and fascination. Jane helped Stormrise up, showing the respect of one warrior to another. The Valkyrie clasped her hand in the traditional warrior's greeting. "I have fought for 200 years, Stormrise announced loudly. "Never have I been defeated with such elegance." From her observation post, Battle Dawn's eyes narrowed. The Valkyrie champion had seen something that worried her. This human didn't fight like anyone they had faced before. She didn't try to prove her strength or show off her power. She simply won, using the least amount of force necessary. The High Commander's voice cut through the chaos. Surprising outcome. But let us see how Earth's champion fares against increasingly difficult opponents. This was merely the first round. As Jane walked back to the preparation area, she caught Battle Dawn's eye. The Valkyrie champion gave her a slight nod, an acknowledgement between warriors who recognized they would soon face each other in what promised to be an unforgettable battle. Admiral Thompson met her with a smile. That was quite a statement. That was just the introduction, Jane replied, already preparing for her next match. Now the real teaching begins. The Valkyrie training hall buzzed with unusual activity. In secret corners and quiet moments between matches, young warriors were practicing moves they had never used before. They mimicked the flowing motions they had seen Jane perform, trying to understand how such simple movements could be so effective. "You're doing it wrong," Stormrise said, entering the hall. The warriors froze, expecting punishment. Instead, the defeated captain walked to the center of the training mat. "The human doesn't use strength here," she pointed to her arms. "She uses movement here." She touched her hips and feet. Word of these secret training sessions reached Battle Dawn as she prepared for the final match. The champion sat in her private quarters, watching recordings of Jane's 3 victories from the previous day. Each fight had been shorter than the last, and none of her opponents had managed to land a solid hit. A knock at her door interrupted her studies. The High Commander entered, her face tight with concern. "The other worlds are talking," the High Commander said. "They say we underestimated the humans. Some even suggest our ways are limited." Battle Dawn stood, her silver armor catching the light. "Perhaps they are right." "What?" "Watch this." Battle Dawn rewound one of the fights. "See how the human moves. There is no wasted energy, no unnecessary force. It's beautiful." The High Commander's eyes narrowed. "Beauty does not win battles, doesn't it?" Battle Dawn challenged. "For 10,000 years, we've believed that superior strength and size meant superior combat skill. Yet this small human has defeated our best warriors without ever matching their strength." In another part of the ship, Jane sat cross-legged in her temporary quarters, meditating. Admiral Thompson entered with news from Earth. "You've become a sensation back home," Thompson said. "Every martial arts school is flooded with new students. People are calling it the Valkyrie Revolution in combat sports." Jane opened her eyes. "And how are the Valkyries taking it?" "That's the interesting part." Thompson showed her a tablet. "Look at this security footage." The video showed groups of young Valkyrie warriors practicing in hidden corners of the ship. They were attempting basic judo throws and aikido movements, helping each other understand the principles of redirecting force. "They're learning." Jane smiled. "Good. Is it? Tomorrow you face Battle Dawn. If they're learning your techniques." "They're not learning techniques," Jane corrected. "They're learning to question their assumptions. That's worth more than any single move I could teach them." Meanwhile, Battle Dawn had called her own private meeting with Stormrise and other defeated warriors. "Tell me everything you felt when fighting the human," she demanded. Stormrise stepped forward. "It was like fighting water. Every time I thought I had her, she had already moved. Not away, but around, using my own strength against me." Another warrior nodded. "I've never felt so helpless. All my power meant nothing." Battle Dawn absorbed their words, her mind working on a new problem. For the first time in her undefeated career, she faced an opponent she couldn't simply overpower. Later that night, something unprecedented happened. A young Valkyrie warrior approached Jane's quarters with a request. "Will you?" The warrior hesitated, then stood straight. "Will you teach me that throw you used? The one where you used Battle Sister Stormrise's weight against her?" Jane looked at the young warrior, seeing the hunger for knowledge in her eyes. "On one condition," she said. "You have to promise to teach it to others." The young Valkyrie's eyes widened. "But that's not our way. We keep our best techniques secret." "And how has that served you?" Jane asked gently. "True strength comes from lifting others up, not holding them down." That night, in a quiet corner of the ship, a small group of Valkyrie warriors gathered to learn from a human teacher. They moved slowly, carefully, learning to feel rather than force, to blend rather than oppose. As Battle Dawn watched this scene on her security monitors, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: uncertainty. Tomorrow's fight wouldn't just determine Earth's fate in the galactic community. It would challenge everything the Valkyries believed about combat, strength, and what it meant to be a warrior. The High Commander's voice came over the ship's communication system. All warriors, prepare for tomorrow's final match. Let us show the galaxy the true meaning of Valkyrie strength. But looking at the young warriors practicing their new moves, Battle Dawn wondered if that meaning was about to change forever. The arena pulsed with energy as billions of beings across the galaxy tuned in to watch the final match. The usual cheering and shouting had been replaced by a tense silence. Everyone knew this wasn't just a fight. It was a clash between two completely different ways of understanding combat. Jane stood in her corner, looking smaller than ever in her simple white training uniform. Across the ring, Battle Dawn's silver armor gleamed under the lights, her undefeated record displayed in glowing red symbols across her chest. The High Commander raised her hand. This is the final match. The rules are simple. Fight until one warrior submits or can no longer continue. The fate of Earth's relationship with the Valkyrie Empire hangs on this outcome. She looked at both fighters. Are you ready? Battle Dawn nodded, her face serious. But when Jane looked closely, she saw something different in the champion's eyes. Not the usual Valkyrie arrogance, but genuine curiosity. Ready, Jane replied calmly. The signal sounded, but unlike every other Valkyrie Jane had faced, Battle Dawn didn't charge in. Instead, she moved forward slowly, testing the space between them with light footwork that seemed impossible for someone her size. You've been watching me, Jane said, circling carefully. As you've watched us, Battle Dawn replied. Let's see what we've both learned. The champion launched a series of attacks that combined traditional Valkyrie power with new, more fluid movements. Jane found herself working harder to read her opponent's intentions. Battle Dawn had adapted, incorporating some of the principles she'd observed. The first exchange ended with both fighters resetting their positions. Neither had gained an advantage, but the audience was spellbound by the display of contrasting styles. Impressive, Jane said. You've already started to change your approach. Battle Dawn smiled, an expression rarely seen on a Valkyrie during combat. A warrior who stops learning has already lost. The next clash was faster, more intense. Battle Dawn's enormous strength came into play. But now it was controlled, focused. Jane slipped away from two attacks that would have ended any other fight, countering with techniques that forced the champion to respect the human skill. In the stands, the young Valkyries who had been secretly practicing Jane's methods watched with wide eyes. They could see their champion incorporating elements of both styles, creating something new and powerful. 20 minutes passed. Both fighters showed signs of fatigue, but neither had gained a decisive advantage. The High Commander watched with growing concern as her champion fought in ways that challenged thousands of years of Valkyrie tradition. Then came the moment that would be remembered for generations. Battle Dawn launched a perfectly timed attack, combining Valkyrie power with human fluidity. It should have worked, but Jane had been waiting for exactly this moment. As the champion committed to the move, Jane used the most basic principle of human martial arts. Turn your opponent's strength against them. The entire arena gasped as Battle Dawn, the undefeated champion of the Valkyrie Empire, found herself flying through the air. But she wasn't finished. The champion turned in mid-flight, adapting to her situation, and managed to land on her feet. Both fighters paused, breathing heavily, a new respect visible in their eyes. Your way of fighting, Battle Dawn said between breaths. It's not about being weak or strong. Jane nodded. It's about understanding that true strength comes in many forms. They clashed again, but this time both fighters moved like water, each adapting to the other's energy. The audience watched in amazement as the human and the Valkyrie created something that had never been seen before, a perfect blend of power and technique. The end came suddenly. Battle Dawn committed to one final powerful attack. Jane seemed to flow around it like water around a rock, and in a move that combined both their styles, used the champion's momentum to secure a complex joint lock. Battle Dawn found herself caught in a position where all her strength meant nothing. She tried to power out, but Jane's technique was perfect. The champion of the Valkyrie Empire did something then that shocked everyone. She laughed. A genuine, joyful laugh that echoed through the arena. "I submit," she announced clearly. "And I thank you for this lesson." The arena erupted in chaos. But above the noise, everyone could see Battle Dawn and Jane helping each other up, bowing in mutual respect. Two warriors who had just changed the way an entire empire understood the meaning of strength. 1 month after the historic match, the Great Hall of the Valkyrie Mothership looked very different from before. Where once only Valkyrie warriors trained, now beings from dozens of worlds practiced together. The sound of bodies hitting training mats mixed with discussions about technique and theory. At the center of it all, Jane moved between groups, offering corrections and encouragement. She watched as a young Valkyrie helped a smaller alien understand the principles of balance, just as she had taught them. "I never thought I'd see this," Admiral Thompson said, standing beside Battle Dawn as they observed the training. Valkyries learning from other species. The former champion's silver armor now bore a new symbol, a circular design representing the flow of combat that Jane had taught them. "We needed this change," Battle Dawn admitted. "For too long, we confused force with strength." Across the room, the High Commander entered with a group of diplomatic representatives. Even she had changed, her traditional armor of war replaced with more ceremonial garb better suited for peace. "The treaty is ready for signing," she announced. "Earth will not only join our trade network, but will help establish the first galactic combat academy." Jane walked over, wiping sweat from her forehead. "And the old combat trials?" "Replaced," the High Commander said firmly. "New worlds will still need to prove their worth, but through demonstration of skill and wisdom, not just power." She looked around the room proudly. "Your victory showed us a better way." A small alien child, not even half Jane's height, approached them shyly. "Teacher Jane," it squeaked, "can you show me how to defend against bigger opponents?" "Of course," Jane smiled, kneeling down to the child's level. "Battle Dawn, would you help me demonstrate?" The former champion stepped forward, and together they showed how size and strength could be overcome with proper technique. The gathered crowd watched as the massive Valkyrie and the human moved in perfect harmony, demonstrating principles that were changing the galaxy's understanding of combat. Later that evening, during a celebration feast, representatives from various worlds shared stories of how the famous match had affected their societies. "Our people always thought we were too small to be warriors," a delegate from a low-gravity world said. "Now our martial arts schools are full, and our strongest fighters are learning restraint and technique," added a representative from a heavy-gravity planet. "Power alone is no longer enough." Battle Dawn stood to make an announcement. "Today marks the beginning of a new era. The Valkyrie Empire will no longer be known just for our strength." She gestured to Jane. "We will be known for our wisdom in recognizing strength in all its forms." Jane listened as more stories were shared, tales of former enemies now training together, of warriors learning to be teachers, of strength being redefined across the galaxy. Her simple victory had sparked a revolution in how different species viewed each other. "What happens now?" Admiral Thompson asked quietly. "Now the real work begins," Jane replied. "Teaching is harder than fighting. Change is harder than victory." As if to prove her point, a group of Valkyrie warriors approached their table. They bowed respectfully, not out of fear or submission, but with genuine admiration. "We've been practicing what you taught us," one said, "but we have questions about applying it to our size and strength." "That's exactly what you should be doing," Jane smiled. taking these principles and making them your own. Every species, every individual must find their own way to embody these teachings. The High Commander's voice cut through the chatter. Let it be known across the galaxy. The age of pure force is over. We enter a new era of balanced strength, where wisdom and technique stand equal with power. As the celebration continued, Jane watched various species mingling, sharing techniques, and forming friendships. She saw Valkyrie warriors teaching their powerful strikes to smaller aliens, while learning subtle movements in return. This was her real victory, not defeating Battle Dawn, but helping create a galaxy where strength could be found in diversity and unity. In the end, it turned out the humans hadn't just shocked the Valkyries. They had helped them grow, and in doing so, they had changed the galaxy forever.